Evolution, as I was taught, it all started with a thing called the Big Bang.
أَوَلَمْ يَرَ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا أَنَّ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضَ كَانَتَا رَتْقًا فَفَتَقْنَاهُمَا.
They say this Big Bang went kaboom and shot out hydrogen gas mostly, and the gas somehow turned to dust, and the dust condensed down into planet Earth. The evolutionists say it started dry, and then over millions of years, volcanic activity produced the water, and then in some little pond of this water somewhere on planet Earth, these inorganic chemicals got together, and they were zapped by some kind of X-ray or something else, and all of a sudden you have this little speck of life. And they say that was about 3.5 billion years ago. And then that little speck of life somehow, over about 3 billion years, became the first cell, which was somewhere around 600 million years ago. And then that progressively became beautiful you.
Dr. Martin's traditional scientific background would go through an evolution, rather a revolution, as he joined the staff as a professor at Baylor Dental College. This was the beginning of the evolution of a creationist.
And so in the fall of 1971, I went to Baylor in Dallas and gave my first lecture. It was on the evolution of the tooth. And I talked about how these fish scales gradually migrated into the mouth and became teeth. And a couple of my students came to me after class that day and said, "Dr. Martin, have you ever investigated the claims of creation science?" Well, that was 1971. I'd never even heard of it. And so I'm thinking to myself, where are these guys coming from? I've never heard of this. And so I said, sure, I'll look into this with you. And I'm thinking, kind of as a cocky young professor, I'll blow these guys away. Well, they asked me to start studying the assumptions that the evolutionists make. And in all my years, 8 years of scientific education, I had never had a single professor tell me about an assumption. And so we started looking at the assumptions. And I began to realize they're making some claims here that really the assumptions aren't valid when they tell us rocks are very old and all these kinds of things. And then they asked me to start studying some animals and see if I thought that animal could evolve. Well, the first thing that we really studied together was this little bug called a bombardier beetle. And this little insect is about a ½ inch long, and it mixes chemicals that explode. So I began to think, okay, now how would that evolve? Let's say if evolution is true, and you're evolving along here, and you don't have a defense mechanism, because that is the defense mechanism of the bug. So if evolution is true, it had to somehow evolve that. So let's say it's coming along here. Well, the first time it evolves the explosion, what does it do to the bug? Boom, you just splattered your bug, okay? So splattered bug pieces don't evolve. So I thought, well, how could this have happened? Well, it doesn't blow itself up. It has another little factory inside itself that manufactures chemicals. A chemical acts as a catalyst so that when you squirt that chemical in with these other chemicals that are like in neutral, you get your explosion. Well, the first time it manufactured that little chemical, here it goes again, blew itself up again. But it doesn't. Why? Well, because it has like an asbestos-lined firing chamber. And even then it would blow itself up if it didn't have somewhere for the explosion to go. So it has like twin tail tubes. And it can aim these tail tubes all the way up, out the side, out the front. Let's say a spider is coming up toward its side and it doesn't have time to turn around and shoot. It can just take its little gun turret and aim it out there and shoot. The explosion on this little bug, all you hear, if you're listening as a human, you hear this pop. But scientists have now put that explosion in slow motion. And it's like about 1,000 sequential little explosions, but they're so fast, all we hear is one pop. And so you think, well, now, why would that be? Well, that was a curious thing for the scientists that study this little bug. A lot of them are at Cornell University, some other places. And what they discovered was that if it was just one big pop, the little bug, if he's shooting like a spider, let's say over here, and he goes, bang, and shoots it, he's going to pop himself right out of there. It's like lighting a burner on a jet engine. So he's out of there. But as long as it is a sequential explosion with his little legs, he can hang on. How would evolution explain a sequential explosion? This little bug messes with all the theories of evolution. There is no way a slow, gradual process is going to produce this bug. There's no way even the newest theories of evolution, like punctuated equilibria, which means evolution happens very fast. Well, there's no way that will explain this little bug. I began to realize, how could this particular little animal, for instance, evolve. It needed all of its parts. It needed everything there all at once, or you just don't have the animal. And my stomach started to churn, if I really want to be honest. And my wife would tell you, my stomach churned for 5 years. It took a 5-year struggle for me to begin to flip the way I think, from thinking in an evolutionary way to thinking in more this animal or little creature, little bug, whatever, was created fully formed, just like it is, because that went against everything I'd ever learned.
Did you know the world's strongest animal is actually the beetle? In fact, in one test, the rhinoceros beetle carried over 850 times its own weight on its back. That would be like me trying to carry 130,000 pounds. I don't think so. Now let's take a look at the world's tallest animal.
The bull giraffe is about 18 feet tall. In order to get blood up that long, skinny neck against gravity, the bull giraffe has to have a powerful pump, and that's his heart. And the heart of a bull giraffe can be as much as 2.5 feet long. Big, powerful pump. Now, as he's going along here, living his life, everything's just fine, but all of a sudden, this 18-foot-tall creature decides, I need a drink of water. So he bends his head down to get a drink of water. Now we have a problem. Because now this powerful pump, instead of pumping against gravity, is pumping with gravity. And so the heart gives a mighty squeeze, and the blood shoots down his neck, hits his brain, and bursts his brain. And so now he just blew his brains out. Okay, so he's dying, and he must be thinking to himself, I need to evolve something here to take care of my problem. When I get a drink of water, I blow my brains out. Of course, we know dead creatures don't evolve. But he doesn't blow his brains out, because as he bends his head down, there are like little spigots in his artery that goes up the neck, little valves, and they close. But the last pump is beyond the last valve. And so it's enough to burst the little arterioles in his brain, but it doesn't go into his brain. The last pump kind of goes whoop underneath the brain into like a sponge. And this sponge just gently expands, and he hasn't blown his brains out, and he gets his drink of water, and now he sees a zebra kind of running up from this side, and he just ignores it. But he sees a lion coming up from this side. And, oh, the lion wants to eat me. I got to get out of here. Now, how does he know the difference, by the way? Evolutionists can't explain that to us. But the fact is, here comes this lion. He's going to eat the giraffe. And so the giraffe jumps up. He runs about 5 steps, passes out. Not enough oxygen to his brain. While he's there, passed out, the lion is eating him. He must be thinking, I need to evolve something here. I got this problem. I pass out when I get up too fast. But he doesn't, of course. Well, why? Well, because God made him so that when he begins to bring his head up, the little spigots, the little valves in the artery open. The sponge under the brain gently squeezes that last little pump of oxygenated blood up into his brain. There are little valves in the vein that goes down the neck. They close, and by the time he's up and running, everything is fine. His blood pressure is fine, and he does just fine. Well, how would that evolve? He needs all of those parts, all there, all at the same time, all at once, or he's dead. And so I think the giraffe is another example of a designer. He needed a designer to design him just like he is. The woodpecker is a very special little bird. The beak of a woodpecker is like industrial strength. It is stronger than other birds' beaks. He has special feet. Most birds have 3 toes out the front, 1 toe out the back. Woodpecker has 2 toes out the front, 2 toes out the back, and that's so he can climb around on a tree trunk, a vertical tree trunk, right side up, upside down, sideways. He can crawl any way he wants to. He has special tail feathers. His tail feathers are different than other birds' tail feathers. They're more resilient, they're spongy, and they're very strong and tough because he tripods himself with his 2 feet and his tail feathers so that he grabs a hold of that tree, fans out his tail feathers, and then bangs his head into the tree. Now, you would think that a woodpecker would go home every night and say to Mrs. Woodpecker, "Oh, I got this headache. I was banging my head on a tree all day." But he doesn't. Why? Well, because God made him with special equipment. For instance, between his beak and his skull, there's a piece of cartilage. It acts as a shock absorber. His skull is the thickest bone per body weight of any creature. As a matter of fact, brain surgeons study the brains of woodpeckers, how they're hooked in there and everything, to help them with like trauma people in accidents, that they need to put their brains back in there. And so they study woodpeckers. The woodpecker, with his strong skull and his shock absorber and his strong beak and his tail feathers and his feet, he's all ready to go except for one thing. Once he drills his hole, he's got to get that bug out of the tree because that's lunch. All right, well, how's he going to do that? Well, most birds, their tongue goes right to the tip of the beak. A woodpecker's tongue goes as much as 10 inches out of his beak. Now, why? Well, because he's going to drill the hole, find the bug tunnel down in the tree, stick his tongue down in the tunnel, and drag the bug out. Now, you would have to say, could I stick my tongue down a hole in a tree and drag a bug out? Of course not. Well, how does the woodpecker do that? Well, God made the woodpecker with little barbs on the tip of his tongue, and he will literally stab that bug larva down in there because it doesn't want to come out. But in case that's not enough, he has a little glue factory in his tongue that manufactures precisely the right glue to stick to the bug, but it doesn't stick to his beak. And so he pulls that bug into his mouth. Now we have a problem. If evolution is true, let's say over hundreds of thousands of years, this woodpecker got all this equipment, and then he glues his tongue to a bug and he swallows the bug. What just happened to his tongue? He just swallowed his tongue. You know, he dies, he just strangled himself, okay? But he doesn't. Why? Well, because as he brings the bug into his mouth, he has another little factory that manufactures the solvent to dissolve the glue. So he dissolves the glue, loosens up the bug, swallows the bug. God made him that way. Woodpeckers, when they peck, they open their eyes between each peck, and they aim their beak, they focus, they aim their beak, they close their eyes, and then they hit the tree. So you hear a woodpecker out there, he's going, drr, drr. Every time you hear that, drr, in between each peck, he opens his eyes, focuses, aims his beak, hits the tree. Why? Well, they used to think it was just to keep the wood chips out. But now the scientists have measured the force of the impact of the woodpecker's head against the tree, and the force is so great that if he did not close his eyes, he would pop his eyeballs out. So I would say, have you ever seen a blind woodpecker? No, they never miss. They never miss. Okay? Now, one special woodpecker, the European green woodpecker. I think he's unique in all the animal kingdom. I don't know for sure, but I think he might be. His tongue is different than any other tongue, as far as I know. Our tongue starts in the back of our throat, comes up and out the front. His tongue starts in the back of his throat, goes down the throat, comes out the back of his neck, up over the top of his head. It's under the skin. Comes out a little hole between his eyes, goes in one of his nostrils, and then comes out of his beak. And you would have to say, now how does that evolve? I've asked evolutionists that question. I've said, now you tell me, how and where did that tongue come from? They don't have a clue. They can't tell me. I'm saying, well, you're telling me that this bird evolved from some other creature, but there's no other creature that we know of with a tongue like that. How did that happen? They don't have any idea. So what could I say as a creationist? I would say God made that little woodpecker, and I think he made that woodpecker to challenge the evolutionary community. Because as they study that little bird, they know there is no way this little thing could evolve.
سنريهم آياتنا في الآفاق وفي أنفسهم حتى يتبين لهم أنه الحق.
I think there are very bright people who study science and do a good job of it. But all of a sudden they get to a point where they have to decide, did this thing happen over long periods of time somehow? Or, boy, it sure looks like it could have happened just bang, just like it is. And then, if they discover, hey, I have no way of describing this thing in terms of evolutionary science, they're faced with the other option, which is maybe a designer and a creator, and they say, I don't want to go that way, okay? So they suppress that evidence. And so many of the things that I studied, we had to search just to find information on them because they are not in the textbooks. They just don't put them in because they have no way to explain it. And so they just ignore it. There's a little bird in Australia. It's called the Australian incubator bird. Some people call it the mound builder. Sometimes it's called the brush turkey. And there's different species. We'll talk about one in particular. But this little bird, about 3.5 to 4 pounds, the female has 2 jobs. Her first job is to check out the nest and see if it's going to be okay. The male builds the nest, and then the female checks it out. Now you would say, well, big deal. She's going to check out the nest. Well, this nest is not like any other nest. Some of these nests have been measured at 20 feet across and as much as 50 feet high. And some of them dig down into the dirt 3 to 6 feet. So it's like a huge, that's why they're called the mound builders. It's like a huge mulch pile. So she comes and she digs down in there, and she comes out and says to Mr. Bird, I don't like this one. And so he says, okay, hang on for a couple months, I'll build you another one. Okay, so he builds her another one. Let's say she likes this one. Now she goes to job number 2, and that is she lays eggs. Now she lays 1 egg every 3 days for 7 months. And it's a little 3.5 to 4 pound bird, and the eggs are almost a ½ pound each. They're almost as big as an ostrich egg. Impossible, impossible. She's dead. I mean, you can't do that, okay? But she does. Now, this one species, the female makes a very thick shell on the eggs, and it has pores. All birds' eggs have pores. That's how they breathe. But this one, the pores are shaped like little ice cream cones. And the tip of the ice cream cone is in toward the inside of the shell. So as the chick begins to develop inside the shell, he gets to a certain day and he can't get enough air. He's going, I can't get enough air. And so he begins to scrape off the inside layer of the shell. And that makes the holes bigger. He's going up the ice cream cone. So now he can breathe. And so he does that all the way along until he finally breaks out of the shell. Now the male bird takes care of the nest. The female, once she lays the eggs, she just goes off, and now he takes care of the nest. Now you would say, well, is that a big problem? Well, yes, because each species has some different qualifications for the nest. And this one I'm going to talk about, the male keeps the nest at 91 degrees Fahrenheit for 7 months. And if it varies by much more than a degree on either side of 91 degrees Fahrenheit, the chicks die. So Daddy Bird is out there every day. He digs down into the nest and he checks the temperature. And the scientists aren't even exactly sure how he does the temperature. But he checks the temperature. Oh, it's 92 degrees. It's too hot. I got to do something. So he runs back up, and sometimes he'll throw sand on top to try and reflect more sunlight, or he has various things he'll do. He also keeps that nest at about 99.5% humidity. If it gets down to about 80%, the chicks dry out, the eggs dry out. He has to keep it at roughly 99% humidity. So 91 degrees Fahrenheit, 99% humidity. That's impossible for a little 3.5 pound, 4 pound bird. When the chick hatches out of its egg, it has all of its feathers. As far as I know, it's the only bird that it's ready to fly. But it can't fly because it's down deep in a big mulch pile. Now, nobody feeds this little bird. Dad doesn't feed the bird. Mommy bird doesn't feed the little baby. They come out of the egg, and then they somehow know, I got to get out of here. So they turn over on their back, and they begin to scrape the sticks and leaves on top of them, and it'll drop down on their chest, and they shake it off their chest, pack it down with their little wings, dig some more, falls down, shake it off, pack it down. It takes up to 3 days for them to dig out of the nest. And nobody told him to do that. Nobody told him to go. Which way? Which way do I go? But how do they know that? You see, well, evolution can't explain those kinds of things, all right? So here it comes. He's out of the nest. Nobody shows it what to eat. He goes off. He knows what to eat. He knows how to catch it and find it. And then the next year, the male bird is going to build a nest. But Daddy Bird didn't show him how. He starts building a mound all by himself. Nobody showed him how to do it. It's a miracle. It's just a miracle. And so you look at even something like a little Australian incubator bird and you say, how could that evolve? If this story of evolution is true, how could that happen? I say, only God can do that.
سنريهم آياتنا في الآفاق وفي أنفسهم حتى يتبين لهم أنه الحق.
If you take an egg and you put it in warm water, you will see bubbles coming out. Now, why do you see those bubbles? Well, because there's little holes all through the egg shell. About 10,000 actually in a chicken shell. Those holes are there so that the chick can breathe, because that's where he gets his air, through those holes, so they can get the waste out of the shell, because the chick, as he develops, is going to eat the yolk, and the yolk, as he burns it up, there's waste products, there's water and different things given off, and he has to be able to get the waste out of the shell, or for instance, just the amount of water that's given off, he would drown right there in the shell. How do you explain all the intricate mechanisms and the perfect timing that it takes for an egg to develop, making this whole thing happen? Because every step of the way, the chick would be dead. Everything has to be done on a particular day and in a particular order, and the timing has to be exactly right, or you have a dead chick. If you have ever boiled an egg or eaten a hard-boiled egg, you'll notice when you peel the egg, there's like that little membrane in there. And that membrane has to be there, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. But on one end of the egg, it's flat, and it looks like the chicken didn't quite fill the egg. Well, that's a special place. That's called the air sac. And so now we take all these parts and we put them together, and we have this little fertilized egg, and now this little chick is developing. By the 5th day, its little heart is pumping. Blood vessels have grown out of the chick. 2 of them go up, hook into the membrane, and those are the ones that it's going to breathe through. It'll get its air through that. The air comes through the pores or the holes in the shell up to the membrane, and then the membrane transfers the oxygen to the artery, the vein that goes into the chick, and then the other vessel that hooks into that gets rid of the waste, and so there's a process there of things coming in and things going out of the shell. 2 more blood vessels hook into the yolk, and that's the way the chick eats. And as he lives in this shell, he begins to get to where he's too big and he can't get enough air, and it's now the 19th day. Now, during this time, he has grown a little tooth on top of his beak. It's called the egg tooth. Now, most of us grow our teeth inside our mouth, not on our beak, but the little chick has this little egg tooth. And on the 19th day, he takes that and he pokes a little hole into that flat end of the egg where the air is. That's called the air sac. And now he has 6 hours to breathe. Now, if we're swimming and we're on the bottom of the swimming pool and we've run out of air and we get up to the top and I just made it. We usually just sit there and lean there and get some good air and breathe a while. Well, not the chick, because if he got into that air sac, I mean, he's going, I can't get enough air, and he pecks into that on the 19th day, not one day sooner or one day later or it's dead. It's the 19th day, goes into that sac. Now he's got 6 hours. Now, is he going to just sit there and breathe that air, or is he going to say, I need to do something else with this air, which is what he says. I've got to get a little hole and use this 6 hours of air. I got 6 hours to peck a little hole through the shell. And now he breathes from the 19th to the 21st day through this little hole in the shell. On the 21st day, that's the day he breaks out of the shell. Now, in the meantime, the systems that hook into the membrane and the systems that hook into the yolk, all of those little vessels, they begin to disattach or deattach themselves. And when he comes out of the shell, sometimes he might have a blood vessel hanging on him somewhere or something like that. But the fact is, these things, it's like he's dropped his spacesuit off, and he is ready to go. And so he comes out of that shell on the 21st day, but every single step along the way had to have perfect timing. It had to be done exactly right. And when he comes out, he's a discrete entity. There's no mistake. This is a chick. All we see in all of nature, in the fossil record and in living creatures, is just discrete, identifiable. We can label them. That's a cow. That's a chicken. And so I think that's more evidence that God made everything, including little chicks, just exactly like they are.
سنريهم آياتنا في الآفاق وفي أنفسهم حتى يتبين لهم أنه الحق